So writing, the section that literally has nothing to do with speaking at all, and yet they are put together in part 1. You have speaking questions affecting listening, listening questions affecting reading, and reading being affected by questions in every other part, but no connection between speaking and writing whatsoever. My guess is that speaking and writing questions are allocated individual time slots, but then you remember that summarize spoken text is the weirdo they decided to leave in the listening section. It just falls apart when you think about it. Fits our expectations for the wonkiness from Pearson, so no surprise there. Today we're here to discuss summarize written text, the very first writing question that tries to break your spirit. Let's get the basics out of the way first. You get 2 to 3 questions per test, and you have to write a summary after reading a passage. You will have 10 minutes to spend on reading and writing, and naturally, it contributes to those 2 scores. You are given a very generous word limit between 5 and 75 words per question, so if you somehow fail to oblige, you will get my full respect. Doesn't matter how you achieve that, you are truly a prodigy. Sounds like summarize written text is easy enough, right? Well, apart from the wide range of allowed word count, the form asks for one more thing. You can only write 1 sentence, and they are very specific in the description, saying that you have to write 1 single complete sentence. 1 and complete are easy to understand, but what about single? Seems like a bit redundant since you already have 1. Why so specific? For this, my understanding is that they disallow the usage of colons and semicolons. They are basically like a cheat for you to have multiple sentences without using periods, so that might be what it's referring to. So, stick to commas, and don't forget about the period at the very end. The 1 sentence limit seems quite difficult to achieve, so we will look at multiple methods to get it done correctly. Then you have the usual stuffs in the scoring categories. 2 points for content, so you have to address the question. 2 points for grammar, remember the emphasis on having a correct structure. And 2 points for vocabulary, focusing not on how long the words are in your summary, but more on whether you use them appropriately, so choose the words from the passage. Oh yeah, you have 1 more point from form, so it's like an all or nothing kind of deal. Get that 1 point no matter the cost. Don't let anything or anyone stop you, not even your mama, you hear me? So we have 7 points total in the raw score. This number will show up again very soon. So, what methods can we employ to score high efficiently? There are 2 main doctrines, and they seem to be quite comparable regarding student success. We will look at both methods, and I'll give you guys the option to choose which or even how much of each methodology that you will use during practice and during the test. Let's first talk about what probably won't work. The first would be just write a simple sentence like, this passage is discussing the topic blah blah blah. Technically, this fits the requirements for form and grammar. If you manage to get this sentence grammatically wrong, I don't know what to say. Learn another language. This isn't gonna work out for you. You should probably get something for content and vocabulary as well if you choose correctly what you fill in the blank. This method has a few problems. The first being even if you don't get a 0 for content, your score will be quite low. You are given 10 minutes for this 1 question, so you should probably do a bit more than just this crap. The second epic fail was more like a myth to me, because it was probably how things were done quite a while back, very likely way before my time. The method was to copy and paste the first and the last sentences and combine them with a conjunction. I never used that method, and agencies don't teach this to their students. Well, at least not anymore if they actually did before. I'm not sure whether this method was ever a feasible way to score high, but for the sake of completeness, don't do this. Now, let's talk about what methods can work, starting with the common practice in agencies. There's even a name for this method. It's oftentimes referred to as the 6 out of 7 method. What it's saying is that with this method, you can guarantee 6 out of the 7 points in the raw score. It's also kind of a cheaty method, but since it works, I think you should be informed. It's pretty much just an expansion on the previous method that no longer works. Instead of picking 2 sentences in the passage and combining them with a conjunction, you pick multiple sentences and combine them with multiple conjunctions. There are a few extra details you should know about this method. It is frequently accompanied by the suggestion that you should go with a high word count, namely in the 60s and the 70s. The main reason for agencies to tell their students to nearly max out on the word count is very obvious. Students might not always make the best choices in terms of the actual content, so doing so can somewhat ensure that they will pick out some of the essential details, so they will guarantee at least a 1 in content. Ideally, this is the one missing point in the 6 out of 7 method. You will get the 1 point for form, 2 points for grammar, and 2 points for vocabulary. If your entire answer is directly pasted from the passage, you shouldn't have a problem with grammar and vocabulary, and after getting the form and 1 point for content, you're all set. At least that's the idea. Things can still go wrong, and when teaching at an agency, I would still recommend students to do a little more. My suggestion would be to paraphrase a little instead of directly copying and pasting the sentences in the passage. I'm not entirely sure whether copying parts of the passage word for word is indeed punishable, but I do know that if, one day, Pearson decides to regard it as an unacceptable way to answer the question, it would be very easy for them to catch you. Think about it. If they punish students for just copying the first and last sentences, what's stopping them from punishing you for copying more out of the passage? Also, just blindly copying sentences from the passage basically means you will include a bunch of junk that doesn't need to be there. Having longer answers also means more chances for you to make a mistake. Some of the passages include quite complicated structures with a lot of commas for appositives, clauses, inversions, prepositional phrases, and parallelisms. I've seen way too many students copying and pasting the passages and ending up with a ton of grammatical errors, oftentimes completely unaware because they assume that rearranging the passage doesn't have an effect on grammar. This can even be worse than asking them to just write the answer from scratch. So, even if you consider this an easy way out, don't just stitch sentences together without checking and going through the structure. Paraphrase a little so you can avoid writing down too much junk so you won't get caught, and so you can avoid many mistakes. Just a little can save your life. In short, until Pearson starts doing something about it, the 6 out of 7 method still seems to work quite well. However, I would like to warn you guys, especially if you're watching this video in the future, use it at your own discretion. And once again, change it up just a little bit. It's not that hard and it would save you a lot of trouble, both imminent and potential trouble. What about another method? Well, if you attend a course that's taught by someone speaking English, then chances are you will learn this method instead. It looks even simpler on paper. You read the passage, understand the concept, and then just write a sentence. They recommend a word count lower than 30 because, let's be honest, when's the last time you saw or heard a ridiculously long sentence so beautifully and meticulously choreographed? Not only is it grammatically correct through and through, but it also serves a purpose for the speaker to casually show off his linguistic capabilities without breaking a sweat during an intellectual conversation to teach people how to easily come up with more than 70 words in a sentence, and it only had 3 commas in it for such elegance and suave. I don't know why anyone would go for 70 words on summarized written text if you don't plan on copying the passage. It really is a lot of work. But I digress. This method basically tells you to do it the proper but freestyle way, the intended way when this question type was designed. That seems quite challenging, so my method is more like somewhere in between, but we can start off with a freestyle. If we go into deep analysis, you will come up with some very interesting discoveries. After reading and understanding the passage, the way for you to decide which info to include is very much like the process of elimination we talked about for describe image and retell lecture. There are about 4 to 5 main points in the passage, and if you manage to cover them all, you're pretty much done. Then the philosophy is pretty much identical to the 6 out of 7 method. Obey the requirements for the form, grammar, and vocabulary, but instead of copying the text and gambling on whether the chosen content is useful, you will pick out the important stuff according to your interpretation. When I teach my own students during one-on-one sessions, I will do a very simple demonstration on the flow of logic when native speakers come up with a very complex structure. The simplicity will actually shock you if you spend some time to try yourself, but pay close attention to this following example. I constantly do this illustration to not only show students how to address a summarized written text question, but also the connection it has with reading and listening passages. So here's a question. Pause the video if you want to go through it yourself because I will start talking about it right away. This passage is about a comparison between traditional and cyberbullying. The first two paragraphs simply give numbers and talk about how traditional bullying is still more common despite the growth in social media and whatnot. Just like for the speaking questions, the numbers are never the main points. The messages behind them are. The third paragraph talks about how most people experiencing cyberbullying are also being bullied in real life, but the more important bit is at the end where it is said that both types of bullying need to be tackled together. Again, just like describe image and retell lecture, usually you will be given more info than needed to finish a question and get a perfect score, and the first piece of info is more like a further elaboration to support the first main point, which is the traditional type being more common. The last paragraph is similar. I usually would choose to include the info from the first sentence because it gives another direct comparison between the two types of bullying. Then the passage talks about how cyberbullying has little association to real-life satisfaction, but in the grand scheme of things, it's relatively disconnected from the rest of the passage. Feel free to include it if you want, but once again, just like how it is for describe image and retell lecture, I would like to see that you have already included the more important stuffs first. Let's use this passage to first demonstrate how the 6 out of 7 method works. Assuming that you have a good understanding of the passage, your answer should be something like this. This answer is exactly 75 words. I did not copy everything word for word because if I did, I will be over the limit. I took out the such as part in the first paragraph for a very simple reason. In a sentence, the meaning of words tells you what's important, but there's something else that does the same job, the structure. If something is important, it will most likely be delivered with a core structure, while other things that come with a branching extension don't matter nearly as much. Take the first paragraph as an example. Now that you understand its main idea, because I just told you, where does the information lie in the structure? The beginning bit is not the core because it begins with the preposition despite. The such as part is also added into the sentence so we can ignore that bit as well. Then this long sentence ends with according to a study, which again is not something that concerns us. It's never the who that matters, but what they say and do. If you remove these bits, isn't it suddenly 10 times easier to understand the main idea? We will spend a big chunk of our time during reading and listening to discuss how to fully utilize this method. For now, just remember that the significance of the info can largely be determined by the structure, even if you have no idea what the words mean. Remember when I said some students can even mess up copying the passage word for word? Usually it's because they misjudge the structure and break off sentences at incorrect places. This is why even for a seemingly foolproof way to answer the question, the 6 out of 7 method still kinda requires a bit of knowledge in sentence structure to ensure that you can get the 2 in grammar. If you can't do that, this method will be just as useful as writing it however you want. Are you ready for some magic? We just talked about how to efficiently read and interpret a passage. If I were to give an analogy, it would be like an onion. There are multiple layers and you can separate them quite easily. By removing the outer layers, you can see what the inner core is, and that is where the important information is being shown. Here comes my question. After going through the passage with me, can you come up with an answer as simple as this one? Really not asking much, right? Does it cover the most important information? It does, but this is like the bare minimum. Have we done this before? Is there an awesome and complicated version waiting for us later? You'll see. Does it fit the form requirements? Of course. Does it have correct grammar? Again, if you mess this up, go learn another language. Are the choices of vocabulary appropriate? Seems so. We have managed to get 6 out of 7 points using only 16 words. Sure, it is based on the fact that you have a good understanding on the passage, but even if you have to blindly pick phrases out of the text, can you do some paraphrasing like this, so instead of the 75-word behemoth that might contain some errors without you knowing it, you can actually guarantee a decent score. We're not done yet. Remember how we peeled the onion layer by layer when reading the passage? For writing, we will be adding in stuff, layer by layer. I will show you how the complex structures are being formed in written English step by step, and prove to you that it's really not that difficult. Now, we already have the backbone we need. What else do we want to put into the sentence? There are 4 reasons on why cyberbullying causes more harm, so let's put that in. I made some changes, but whatever. Note how I use a prepositional phrase to add more info to the sentence, which is precisely what prepositions are for. These are the reasons for causing more harm, so they are added to the more harmful part. Can you include fewer terms in this parallelism? Do it as you please. You don't even have to include any of them. Remember, you have some freedom about what to and not to put in. We said numbers are not that important, but we already covered the important parts, so let's put some in. Easy. Again, the numbers talk about how traditional bullying is more common, so we use a preposition to put in a number just like before. The third passage talks about how cyberbullying is more like an additional tool to inflict pain onto the victims, which is something we might consider to be more important than the number. No problem, we just put it in right now. Let me repeat myself just one more time. Another prepositional phrase added to where it makes sense. Now, what about clauses? They are slightly more complicated than prepositional phrases because they are more flexible and more powerful. There isn't a clear distinction as to which one to use for a specific situation, but I will give you an example right now. I could have used the original prepositional phrase in the passage, but I choose not to. It really doesn't matter so long as it is correct. We already have 5 layers now. If you look at the final version, does it not look like the cool flexes I did for speaking? This is how you add in complexity to a sentence. The core message is still there, we barely ever touch them. It's the insertions of extra layers that seem to complicate a sentence quite a bit, but if you can recognize the fact that those are just branches of the main trunk, you can remove them just as easily as you can add them in. Usually you would be removing things when reading to get a clearer idea of the passage, and you would be adding in bits and pieces for writing, so it looks like you actually know what you're writing about. There are a few more points I'd like to discuss. Firstly, the word count now is at a comfortable 41. This is something that I generally use as a measuring stick to see if you have covered enough content. If you can manage to write about 40 words, it's a good place to stop. The second point is that for this example, I chose a certain order to put in the pieces. That's completely by choice. Take another look at the additional parts. They don't overlap with each other at all. It's completely up to you as to which pieces to add, what order to add them, and what structure to use. There are other things in the passage that I could have included, and if I feel like it, I just might add them in. Another beauty for this writing style is that it is modular. How many layers you can have completely depends on your understanding of the passage, how much time you have left for this question, and whether you want to add in more stuff or not. To wrap up, let's talk about why the other methods suck and why my method is brilliant. The 6 out of 7 method is bad because it might be considered as cheating in the foreseeable future. It still requires you to have a decent understanding of what the important messages are, and you can accidentally make mistakes when copying the passage since it's so freaking long. By then, you're simply not getting 6 out of 7 anymore. The foreign agency's methodology is just be good at reading and writing, but that takes a hell of a long time. My methodology is both flexible and robust. You start off with some chosen ideas in the passage, paraphrase them so they have simple structures not only to reduce the likelihood of making a mistake, but also to provide the convenience later on should you choose to add in more stuff. You get to decide what to add, how many to add, and if you want to go home early. Sounds too good to be true? That's how I did it, that's how many of my private students did it, and that's how you can do it as well. We'll have an episode for question walkthrough on summarized written text real soon, and we will actually include 3 versions for each of them: the 6 out of 7 method, the be good method, and my method, which will include an evolution to show how the baby grows into a titan. Please like, subscribe, and share for more PTE related content and get your target score as soon as possible. All the methods I shared with you in this video are very legit, so let's not make up so much crap that Twitter has to flag your tweets as factually incorrect. And I'll see y'all next time.